The girl's eyes were bloodshot, to the point of looking blood-filled. She tried desperately to remember why she was here, what she had done to deserve this. Her mouth had been sewn shut, and a rope of deep crimson was tied around her head. It ascended from the bottom of her jaw, where it had been sewn in, up her face, over her shaven head, and back down again to connect to the other end in a sacred knot of warding. Her small, delicate frame trembled, the burlap brown smock that gathered around her not enough to stay the cold. The blackness of her cell was total and complete. There, in the middle of the cell, she sat chained to the floor, hands clasped behind her back, tied with crimson cords in looping knots. In the crushing darkness, she could hear the sound of her heart beating. From outside the door of the cell, the sounds of other people could be heard moaning, screaming, and speaking in random conversations that were both insane and terrifying. Someone was cursing the Emperor. She wept tears that ran down her face as she tried to speak, to call out for help as the sutures bathed her 12-year-old mouth in pain. From somewhere down the hall she could hear hardened voices speaking in low Gothic, and for a moment her heart leapt with hope. She listened as the voices grew louder. She could hear the stamp of their iron-soled boots as they drew nearer, and her young heart hoped against hope that someone would find her and save her from this nightmare. She tried to scream, but only moans of agony escaped her tethered mouth.
I must open the sutures of your mouth in order to feed you.
The voice hit the girl like a fist to the face, and yet it was as soft as silk. Tears began to rush from her eyes anew, as desperate fear overwhelmed her.
If you speak, or scream, or even make a sound, the officer behind you will put a bullet through your skull, and you will be condemned forever to wander the Eye of Terror, separated from the most holy Emperor of mankind. You may nod if you understand me,
the woman said. The girl nodded up and down slowly. She felt a gloved hand grab her jaw in a tight grip, then the cold steel of a blade slicing through her sutures and gliding against her cracked, parched, bloody lips. As the woman fed her, she could feel her strength returning, and with it, the memories of a past not so long ago.
You are a Psyker. The Black Ship is where you will live out the remainder of your life, unless you can be trained, unless we can find a use for you.
The woman fed the girl another spoonful of protein mush. The girl started to ask a question, but felt the cold barrel of the shotgun press against her skull. She began to shake with renewed fear as she felt the malice of the man's thoughts. Her memories were beginning to flow again with images of blood, screams, and death. The fear of the man behind her was enough to jar the memories into action. The smell was like that of copper on fire. The blood of her mother, father, and brothers boiled within the kettle before them. The townspeople chanted around it and drank of its contents even as they partook of the flesh of her still screaming mother. The girl smiled as she remembered how she had taken her vengeance upon the townspeople. She smiled as she opened her eyes for the first time in this dark room and looked into the face of the woman standing before her. The woman's face turned white with fear. Within the girl's mind, she was at home, standing in the midst of the townspeople who had butchered her family. The girl's hatred of them welled up within her breast and into her bones. She began to scream. All around her, the townspeople began to convulse and fall to the ground. One by one, their fragile bodies began to pop, the insides trading places with the outside, bones splintering into mushy paste. Eyes popped in their sockets and brains exploded from shattered skulls. She had begun to dance as she sloshed around in the contents of the corpses. She twirled and stepped back and forth in their blood, their guts and intestines oozing between her toes, covering her feet and licking her shins. Outside, people fell on shattered legs and burst into flame, their flesh alighting in synchronized pyres that lit up the night. Stepping outside, she could see that some of the people still moved, trying to crawl away, fear of the little girl causing them to bray like wounded cattle. Slowly, she walked up to them and screamed into their ears. At the sound of her, their skin melted and their bones were laid bare. She began to laugh and apply to the townspeople. She leapt through their blood and danced on their bones. She could taste their terror even as they died. Her vengeance turned to sadness as she remembered her family nailed upon the walls of their home. Slowly, exhausted, the girl went back inside. At the feet of her father, the Inquisition had found her. She lay there as if in a trance. At once, Inquisitor Gilda Macy understood what had happened and transferred her to the Black Ship. The blackness faded from the girl's eyes slowly as if a fog dissipated before her. Bound to her chair, she could not break free. All she could do is look into the once beautiful face of Inquisitor Gilda Macy. The officer that had placed the shotgun to her head was now in the corner, twisted inside out and covered with blood from where his shattered bones were now exposed. The woman was slumped backwards, with not a shred of flesh still upon her torso or face. The Black Ship drifted in the cold blackness of space for 3 days before a search party braved the confines of the Psyker vessel. As the girl opened her eyes, they focused upon the twisted, soulless eyes of the captain of the Unfailing Eye Chaos Marine chapter. His voice was like gravel as he turned her face from side to side.
"What do we have here?"
he asked coldly. He began to laugh, until she began to scream.